Hello everyone, and welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today, we'll be talking about Amerithrax, or the Anthrax investigation, the deadliest biological terror attack in 21st century American history, which took place in 2001. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's begin. On September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers in Manhattan collapsed, and the Pentagon was attacked. In the aftermath, the United States was gripped by trauma, paranoia, and a profound sense of insecurity. The skies no longer felt safe, and anger and fear toward terrorist organizations beyond the nation's borders ran deep. Amid this national trauma, Americans lived with the anxious uncertainty of not knowing when, where, or how the next attack might come. Yet, no one could have imagined that the next threat would arrive through something as ordinary as a mailbox, carried by an invisible enemy in the form of microscopic spores. The first signs of this new attack appeared in late September to early October 2001, when the shock of 9/11 had barely begun to fade. At the headquarters of American Media Incorporated, AMI in Boca Raton, Florida, photo editor Robert Stevens began experiencing flu-like symptoms and sought medical help. Initially, his condition was mistaken for pneumonia or a severe flu, but it quickly deteriorated. Doctors soon made a shocking discovery: he had contracted a rare form of inhalational anthrax, a highly lethal disease. Its very presence suggested deliberate human intervention. Stevens died shortly thereafter, becoming the first victim of a new kind of terror, one that turned the fear of an unseen enemy into a grim reality for Americans still recovering from 9/11. Almost simultaneously, reports began surfacing that suspicious letters had been received by several major media outlets including AMI, NBC News, The New York Post, and CBS News. These letters were crudely handwritten, carrying messages that either supported the 9/11 attacks or expressed anti-American sentiment. Investigators quickly noted that the letters were not random. Instead, they had been deliberately sent to the centers of information and public influence, the media, in what appeared to be a calculated attempt to maximize psychological impact. This was no act of random rage. It was a strategic campaign of psychological terror. The white powder scare that began in Florida soon spread to New York and New Jersey, contaminating postal facilities and infecting postal workers. The nation's public health system found itself in crisis. While anthrax bacteria can occur naturally in soil, the spores found in these letters had been refined and weaponized, optimized for maximum lethality. The CDC and the FBI launched emergency operations to trace the source of the anthrax, assess contamination levels, and prevent further attacks. In this early stage of the investigation, one painful lesson became clear. While America had been focused on defending itself from external enemies using bombs and planes, the real threat had already slipped quietly inside the nation, spreading through its own postal system, an attack designed to destabilize the very structure of everyday life. The death of the first victim and the discovery of the first anthrax-laced letters would soon trigger a wave of fear across the entire country, ushering in one of the most chilling biological crises in modern American history. By the time the initial anthrax attacks on the Florida media company had struck fear across New York, the terror campaign was already shifting toward an unexpected and far more political target. In early October 2001, a second and deadlier wave of anthrax-laced letters was mailed, this time aimed directly at the heart of the U.S. government, Washington, D.C. This second wave was far more sophisticated and aggressive than the first. The letters were sent to the offices of Senator Tom Daschle, then the Senate Majority Leader, and Senator Patrick Leahy, also a prominent Democrat. The delivery of these contaminated letters resulted in the unprecedented contamination of the Hart Senate office building, a central hub within the U.S. Capitol complex. Congressional aides and staffers were suddenly exposed to potential infection, and the building was immediately evacuated and sealed off. What had begun as an act of intimidation now escalated into something far greater. It temporarily paralyzed the very core of American democracy and its legislative process. The situation was swiftly elevated to a national emergency. The FBI made the Amerithrax investigation its top priority, while the White House and the newly forming Department of Homeland Security were forced to undertake a complete re-evaluation of the nation's postal system. The problem, however, was that the anthrax spores weren't just released when the letters were opened. During sorting and transport, microscopic contamination spread to hundreds of thousands of other pieces of mail, causing widespread exposure. As a result, two major postal facilities, the Trenton Mail Processing Center in New Jersey and the Brentwood Mail Facility in Washington, D.C. became heavily contaminated. Postal workers at these facilities contracted inhalational anthrax, and several eventually died. These workers, often invisible to the public eye, became the unsung victims of a national crisis, struck down while performing one of the most routine functions of American life, delivering the mail. The government was forced to launch an unprecedented decontamination operation. Buildings and postal facilities designated as contaminated zones were shut down for months, even years. Powerful chemical agents like formalin gas were used to neutralize the spores, at enormous financial and logistical cost. The shutdown of the Brentwood facility, in particular, caused severe disruptions to mail delivery throughout the Washington metropolitan area. This escalation phase revealed that the intent of the attacks went far beyond murder. It was a direct assault on the nation's infrastructure and government functionality. By this point, the FBI began to seriously consider that the perpetrator was not an external terrorist like Osama bin Laden, but an insider, someone with advanced microbiological knowledge and access to high-level bioresearch materials within the United States. This shift in perspective marked a turning point in the Amerithrax investigation. The realization that the enemy might not be foreign, but one of us. From then on, the investigation evolved into something far larger than a criminal case. It became a national war against an invisible contamination, with America's top scientists and law enforcement agents working side by side to confront one of the most complex biological threats in modern history. As contamination reached Washington, D.C., the FBI's Amerithrax investigation team came under immense pressure. Public fear had reached its peak, and the government demanded swift justice. However, the initial theory that the attacks were the work of an external terrorist organization hit a dead end, with no concrete evidence to support it. Despite massive resources being poured into the investigation, the FBI still could not answer the most fundamental questions: who had done it, why, and how had they managed to create and distribute such a highly refined biological weapon. Amid this investigative crisis, in 2002, roughly a year after the attacks, the FBI turned its attention to Drive. Stephen Hatfill, a bioweapons expert. Hatfill had previously worked on biological defense programs for the U.S. military and the Department of Defense, and his background seemed at least superficially to fit the profile of someone capable of carrying out such an attack. The FBI officially labeled him a person of interest, and when that information was leaked to the media, the situation spiraled out of control. Almost overnight, Hatfill became the scapegoat, the man the American public believed to be responsible for one of the most terrifying terrorist acts in modern U.S. history. The investigation against Hatfill was relentless and invasive. The FBI raided his home and workplaces, monitored his movements, and scrutinized every aspect of his personal life. The media published sensational and speculative reports portraying him as the likely perpetrator, exposing his private affairs and destroying his reputation. His professional career collapsed, and his name became synonymous with suspicion and infamy. Although Hatfill vehemently maintained his innocence, his protests were drowned out by the combined forces of law enforcement and media hysteria. But as the investigation dragged on, the FBI encountered a severe crisis of credibility. Despite the intense scrutiny, no hard evidence ever emerged to directly connect Hatfill to the anthrax spores used in the attacks. There were no biological, physical, or logistical links tying him to the crime. The FBI had become so fixated on Hatfill's profile and potential motive that it strayed from the principles of evidence-based investigation. Even within the task force, doubts began to surface about whether Hatfill was truly the perpetrator. However, by that point, the case had become so entangled with public perception and media coverage that reversing course seemed almost impossible. Ultimately, the FBI concluded that there was no basis for prosecution, and in 2008, all allegations against Hatfill were formally dropped. Hatfill later sued the U.S. government for defamation and unlawful surveillance, and the government was forced to settle for millions of dollars, effectively acknowledging the investigation's grave mistakes. This so-called Hatfill crisis became the most damaging failure of the entire Amerithrax investigation. It diverted precious time and resources, delayed the pursuit of the real perpetrator, and severely eroded public trust in the government's ability to manage the crisis. While the FBI chased the wrong man, the true culprit remained free, leaving the Amerithrax task force to face an urgent and daunting challenge to recover lost time and rebuild the case, this time based on real scientific evidence. After years of misguided investigation into Stephen Hatfill had collapsed due to insufficient evidence, the FBI's Amerithrax task force found itself at a critical crossroads, Facing unprecedented public criticism and a desperate need to regain both lost time and credibility. To recover from this failure, investigators made a bold decision. They would abandon traditional investigative methods entirely and devote all their efforts to a new and rapidly emerging scientific field: forensic microbiology. The reasoning was simple and sobering. Only science could reveal the truth, free from human bias. The first focus of this new approach was the anthrax spores recovered from the letters themselves. These were not ordinary, naturally occurring spores. They were highly uniform, finely milled into microscopic particles that could be easily inhaled, a clear indication of weaponization. This level of refinement suggested that the perpetrator possessed advanced microbiological expertise and sophisticated drying and processing equipment. But the most crucial discovery was that the anthrax in the letters was a variant of the Ames strain, a strain known to be part of the U.S. government's biological defense program, because only a handful of top-level research laboratories in the United States had authorized access to this strain. Investigators were able to narrow the field of suspects dramatically, focusing on America's own scientific community. FBI scientists and researchers at national laboratories embarked on a groundbreaking effort to trace the genetic fingerprint of the Ames strain used in the attacks. By sequencing the DNA extracted from the anthrax spores, they identified tiny genetic mutations and unique features within the sample. It was like trying to identify an original machine from a sea of replicas, an unprecedented scientific challenge that mobilized some of the most advanced biological tracing technologies developed in the post-9/11 era. After years of meticulous analysis, scientists discovered that the anthrax spores used in the attacks carried 4 distinct genetic signatures, unlike any other known Ames strain sample. These genetic markers acted like a biological barcode, allowing investigators to systematically eliminate thousands of samples from laboratories worldwide and narrow the origin to a single source. Eventually, they traced these unique genetic signatures to one specific flask known as RMR 1029, housed at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIID in Fort Detrick, Maryland. This was the epicenter of America's biological defense research. The discovery marked the climax of the investigation. The focus shifted away from terrorists and foreign operatives to a very different kind of suspect: a small group of U.S. government scientists who had direct access to the RMR 1029 flask. The suspect pool shrank from hundreds to just a handful. The FBI began closely examining the names of those responsible for maintaining and securing the flask. Among them, one stood out: Bruce Ivins, a senior microbiologist who had spent 18 years at USAMRIID working on vaccine development and biological defense research. Ivins not only managed and studied the RMR 1029 anthrax spores himself, but also had 24-hour access to the facility where the material was stored. The genetic evidence pointed conclusively to a single source, and Ivins was its gatekeeper. Armed with this breakthrough, the FBI began an intensive investigation into Ivins's past, behavior and psychological state, searching for motive and opportunity, the final pieces of the puzzle. This scientific breakthrough represented the long-awaited turning point in the Amerithrax case, a triumph of genetics and forensics over speculation and bias. 7 years after the attacks, the investigation had finally reached the threshold of truth. All that remained was to understand why Ivins had turned his weapon not against an enemy nation, but against his own fellow Americans. As scientific evidence increasingly pointed toward Bruce Ivins, the FBI entered the final phase of its painful 7-year investigation. The genetic fingerprints had traced the anthrax spores to a flask in Ivins's own laboratory, and investigators now turned to an exhaustive examination of his mental state, alibi, and motive. In this final stage, the FBI conducted a comprehensive psychological profiling of Ivins, interviewing his colleagues, close acquaintances, and family members. They also carried out a forensic review of his research notes, email correspondence, and computer activity logs. What emerged was a portrait of a deeply complex and unstable man. Ivins exhibited signs of paranoia, along with an obsessive need for recognition. Regarding his position and expertise within the biological defense program, he was particularly anxious that his role in the anthrax vaccine development project was being diminished or threatened. Investigators theorized that Ivins might have orchestrated the anthrax attacks as a distorted attempt to prove his importance and to revive attention and funding for the declining vaccine program. In the chaotic aftermath of 9/11, he may have sought to create a national security crisis that would justify his work and reaffirm his significance, a profoundly egocentric and misguided motive. FBI agents corroborated this theory with records showing Ivins's late-night access to the lab, along with circumstantial evidence linking his movements to the locations from which the anthrax lace letters were mailed. The puzzle was nearly complete. However, the ending of this story came not in a courtroom, but through a personal tragedy. In July 2008, just as the FBI was preparing to indict him and had begun formal discussions with his attorney, Bruce Ivins took his own life by ingesting a lethal dose of prescription medication. His suicide, while marking closure for the FBI, offered no true resolution for the public or for the victims' families. Ivins never stood trial, never testified, and never explained his actions. This left an enduring uncertainty. Could the evidence truly prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he was solely responsible? In 2010, the U.S. government released its final Amerithrax report, a massive compilation of scientific and circumstantial evidence officially concluding that Ivins acted alone. Yet, many scientists and critics continued to question whether the investigation had prematurely dismissed other possibilities, arguing that the FBI had closed the case too neatly by assigning blame to a man who could no longer defend himself. Ultimately, the Amerithrax case ended in silence, but its impact on American society was profound. In the aftermath, the U.S. postal system was completely overhauled. Mail destined for government buildings began undergoing mandatory radiation screening, and corporate mail handling procedures became far more stringent. The government also restructured security protocols governing the storage and handling of high-risk biological materials across the nation. The anthrax attacks revealed how terrorism had evolved from visible physical assaults to invisible biological threats, and demonstrated how forensic science had become essential to national security. Yet, with the perpetrator gone and his motives unspoken, the fundamental question of why remains unanswered, forever sealed in the labyrinth of history. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on the next story of true crime and mystery.